My wife left me while I was taking care of my dying father. But when my father's will made me a millionaire, she came crawling back. I'm a 36-year-old man, married for 8 years, and we have 2 children. Along with this, I'm the only son of my ailing father. My dad has been suffering from kidney issues for several years, but his condition worsened significantly in the past 2 to 3 years. Now, he has to undergo dialysis twice a week. Earlier, he could manage the trips on his own, but over the past year, he frequently asked me to accompany him. His health has been deteriorating, and he's growing weaker by the day. To ensure he's not alone during this challenging time, I created a routine for myself. I decided I would take him for dialysis every time. Since dialysis is scheduled twice a week, I fix Saturdays and Wednesdays. Saturdays are my days off, so it's manageable. For Wednesdays, I requested permission from my boss to leave early and compensate for the missed hours by working late at night after returning home. I've been with my company for 10 years, and my boss recognizes me as a hard-working and loyal employee. He readily granted me the special arrangement. However, the real challenge was at home with my wife, Ale, who is 34 years old. When Ale found out that I would be taking my dad for dialysis twice a week, she became upset. She had always disliked it when I accompanied my father occasionally, but she never voiced her displeasure openly. Now that I had taken on the responsibility fully, she couldn't hold back. She bluntly said that I was wasting my time with my father because, according to her, no matter what I did, he would never appreciate me. Let me give you some context. My dad owned a successful merchandising business and had accumulated substantial wealth. He wanted me to inherit and run his business, but I had a passion for something different, technology. I love coding and creating software. So, after high school, while my dad wanted me to pursue business or management courses, I chose to study software engineering. At first, he accepted my decision, as long as I was willing to eventually join his company. However, after completing my degree, I started working for a renowned tech firm instead. This upset my father deeply. He wanted me to carry on his legacy, but I chose a different path. After my marriage, he asked me one final time if I wanted to take over the business. When I said no, he became furious and declared that he would donate all his wealth to charity, leaving me with nothing. But I stood firm in my decision. At the time, I was earning well and had already purchased a car in my own house by the age of 29. I was confident that I could lead a comfortable life without relying on his money. I told him I didn't need his wealth and would build my own future. Our relationship became strained after that. 5 years ago, my mother passed away from a cardiac arrest, which was a devastating blow to my father. I had moved out at 17 to attend college, and later started living independently when I got a job. My mom had been his only companion, and losing her was the most heartbreaking thing for him. That tragedy brought us closer again. I began visiting him more often, and took my kids along to spend time with him. Over time, our bond grew stronger. Eventually, he stepped down from his business and handed it over to a trust to manage. As for my wife, Ale, she was never close to my parents, especially my mother. While my mom was alive, Ale often avoided visiting them, saying my mom interfered too much in our lives that my wife, Ale, and my parents never got along. When my father declared that he would remove me from his will, Ale began openly criticizing my parents, calling them mean and selfish. I repeatedly told her to stay out of my relationship with them, but she constantly interfered, claiming it would impact our future, especially that of our children. I assured her that our future, including the children's, was secure regardless of my father's wealth. However, she refused to understand. Coming to the present situation, Ale created an uproar when she found out I would be accompanying my father for dialysis twice a week. I tried explaining to her that Dad had no one else but me. His parents passed away long ago, and although he has an elder brother, he lives on the other side of the city and barely visits. Since Mom's passing, Dad has been extremely lonely, and I cannot abandon him in this condition. Yet, My wife refuses to comprehend this. Lately, she has made my life incredibly difficult. Every Saturday, she comes up with plans, like hosting a party at home, deep cleaning the house, taking the kids on outings, or even something trivial like picking up groceries. I explained that she could plan anything she wanted on Sundays, as Saturdays were reserved for taking Dad to dialysis. Despite this, she continues making plans on Saturdays and later scolds me for being late or missing out. On dialysis days, I rush to pick up my father, take him to the center, wait until it's done, drop him home, and then hurry back, only to face Aile's sarcasm and tantrums. The same happens on Wednesday evenings. I had committed to my boss that I would make up for the missed work hours late at night after returning from dialysis. However, Aile always finds ways to disrupt my routine. Almost every Wednesday evening, she leaves the house to meet her family, reconnect with old friends, or attend random parties, leaving me with the responsibility of caring for our children. This forces me to juggle cooking, feeding our younger child, supervising the older one, and completing my pending work, all after a tiring day at the office and the dialysis center. My father has noticed how rushed and stressed I've become. He has often suggested letting his nurse accompany him to dialysis, seeing how I barely spend any time with him. When I drop him home, I'm in such a hurry that I don't even step inside. Even while picking him up, I call ahead and ask him to be ready and waiting outside. Dad has a full-time nurse and caretaker, but I can't help feeling guilty for not spending quality time with him. The drive from his house to the dialysis center takes about 30 minutes. I used to enjoy those drives, chatting about the good old days in my childhood. However, with Aile's constant tantrums, all I can think about now is rushing back home. Most of the time, I'm consumed with stress and urgency, and the meaningful conversations with my father during those drives have become rare. I find myself speeding through traffic, taking shortcuts, and overtaking other vehicles just to save time during the drive. This is the only time I get to spend with my father, and I don't want to ruin it or stop accompanying him by asking him to go with the nurse. I know I have responsibilities as a son, but I'm struggling to endure the situation with my wife any longer. Things are only getting worse. My wife, Aile, is doing everything she can to dissuade me from attending to my father. Her reasoning is that it's a lost cause. Dad already removed me from his will and donated his wealth to charity. So, in her eyes, there's no point wasting my time and energy on him. I can't understand her logic. Do we only do things for profit and loss? What if someone's parents are poor and have no wealth? Should their children abandon them just because they have nothing to give? After months of listening to her constant complaints, I finally snapped and told her that her parents weren't leaving her anything either. So why does she keep visiting them? That remark sent her into a frenzy. She screamed that her parents have done far more for her than my greedy father. She claimed they supported her in everything, unlike my father, who, according to her, disowned me for not joining his business. She added, "My father would never do that to me, so don't you dare compare my parents to yours." These kinds of arguments have become a regular occurrence in my home, especially on Wednesdays and Saturdays after I return from dialysis. Each argument seems to grow uglier and more hostile. At first, she fought with me privately. Now, she yells and shouts at me in front of our children. It doesn't stop there. I've caught her bad-mouthing my father in front of our children and trying to manipulate them against both him and me. When I intervened, it led to yet another ugly fight. Her tantrums have become so routine that, on days she doesn't argue, I almost feel like something is missing. However, this only means she becomes even more aggressive the following day. I've reached the point where I don't even respond to her anymore. I don't yell back or argue. I simply ignore her as if she doesn't exist. What else can I do? I cannot abandon my father just to please her. I don't care if he removed me from his will. He did it because of my own decisions. I refuse to join his company. I know it must have been heartbreaking for him to give his hard-earned business to a trust. That company was like his baby, and I understand why he made the choice to disown me. Sometimes, I feel like karma is catching up to me because of how I hurt my dad in the past. Meanwhile, my father is growing weaker by the day. He can barely walk on his own and needs support even to step out of the house. Initially, to save time, I used to ask him to be ready and wait outside so I could pick him up quickly. I'd also drop him off at the gate. But now, I no longer care about being late. I go inside, help him walk carefully to the car, and after dialysis, I make sure he is safely settled in his bed before leaving. My father is also experiencing shortness of breath, so I ensure to walk him at his own pace, as slowly as he needs. While driving, I make it a point to drive carefully, avoiding overspeeding, as I don't want to stress his heart further. Honestly, I no longer worry about being late getting back home, because rushing to deal with that woman's tantrums was pointless. If I must face her negativity anyway, why not at least keep Dad happy? However, my casual attitude seemed to worsen things at home. Just yesterday, Ale gave me an ultimatum. I had to choose between my father and her. I tried to reason with her, explaining that Dad wouldn't be with us forever. Seeing his condition, it didn't seem like he had much time left. Her reply was shockingly cold. In that case, you need to choose wisely. Someone who will be with you forever or someone who's going to die soon. Her insensitivity was infuriating. I told her, you know what? I'd rather choose my father over someone as evil and selfish as you are to a dying man. Without another word, she packed her bags and left. I didn't stop her. I felt she needed time to cool off, and honestly, I needed some space from her as well. In her absence, I've been managing the house, taking care of my children, my father, and my work. Surprisingly, I feel so much more at peace. Her absence has been soothing, like a weight lifted off my shoulders. Then, 2 days ago, I received divorce papers from her. While I had anticipated this outcome, I didn't think it would happen so soon. Still, I was shocked. Yet, deep down, I felt relief. I didn't call her or try to plead. Instead, I signed the papers and sent them back to her. Surprisingly, she didn't request custody of the children, which was my only concern. She clearly had no interest in raising them. When she received the papers, she called me, yelling about how I could just sign them without begging her to stay. I found it ironic and almost amusing. Her mother then grabbed the phone and shouted at me, saying that I should have acted like a man and convinced Ale to return to the marriage instead of simply signing the papers. I couldn't help but laugh. Why would I do that? She wanted a divorce, and I simply complied. I even taunted her, saying that she had abandoned not just me, but also her own children. She replied that I could keep all my assets, including the kids, as she didn't want any of it. Her mother chimed in, saying that Ale was still young and didn't want the baggage of raising children. I calmly told them that was fine by me. I was happy to have my kids with me. While it's undoubtedly a relief to no longer deal with Ale, I worry about my children, especially the younger one. They miss their mother, and it's difficult for me to manage all responsibilities alone when I'm at work. Still, I'm hopeful that I'll find a way through this. This will be a shorter update. I've shifted to my father's house along with my children, and I must say, it's one of the best decisions I've made. Thank you to everyone who suggested this. It worked out wonderfully. Moving in with Dad has been great for all of us. My father now has the joyful company of my children, and they, in turn, have their grandpa to play with. Dad's full-time caregiver was happy to take on the added responsibility of watching over the kids for a raise. It's a win-win situation. Someone to care for my children under my father's loving supervision. It's heartwarming to see Dad laughing and playing with the kids. They adore spending time with their grandpa, and it brings me immense happiness to see them so cheerful. Despite everything, this feels like the start of a happier chapter in our lives. Ale never expected things to turn out this way. She thought divorcing me would make my life miserable, believing I wouldn't be able to juggle all my responsibilities. managing the children, caring for my father, running the household, and maintaining my work. But everything has fallen into place perfectly. It turns out I'm the one having the last laugh. The divorce was the best decision ever. Honestly, I couldn't be happier. Unfortunately, I have some sad news. My father passed away last week in his sleep. The night before, he had gone to bed happy and content after spending time playing with my children, but he never woke up again. The doctor later confirmed that he passed away peacefully. Both the doctor and Dad's caregivers, including his nurse, mentioned that moving in with him had significantly improved his quality of life and even extended his lifespan by several months. Before I moved in, he was already on the verge of giving up. Losing my only surviving parent is undoubtedly heartbreaking, but I find solace in knowing that he spent his final months in happiness and comfort, surrounded by love. My children are also deeply saddened by his passing. However, I'm proud of the values my father instilled in them. They often repeat his words about accepting reality and moving forward because life never stops for anyone. Hearing them share his wisdom fills me with pride and gives me strength during this moment of despair. But there's more to this story, something entirely unexpected. After Dad's passing, his lawyer reached out to me, asking me to come to his office for the reading of my father's will. I was surprised because Dad had made it clear to me long ago that he had decided to donate all his wealth to a trust. I told the lawyer it wasn't necessary for me to be there and that he could proceed with the paperwork to transfer everything to the trust. I asked the lawyer if I needed to vacate Dad's house, assuming it had also been given to the charity trust. To my surprise, he laughed and told me to simply come over to his office. When I arrived, I noticed that the trust members were already present. Apparently, the lawyer had called them as well. As the lawyer began reading the will, tears filled my eyes. To my amazement, my father had named me as his heir. All his business, his house, and his wealth were left to me. Overwhelmed, I asked the lawyer if this change had been made recently, assuming Dad had altered his decision after I started taking care of him. The lawyer smiled and reassured me that I had always been his heir. The will had never been changed. I broke down in tears, realizing that my father had never abandoned me. Perhaps his earlier threats to disown me were only meant to push me to carry forward his business and legacy. I couldn't stop crying, feeling a deep sense of regret for having hurt my father throughout his life. Yet, he had always cared for me. The lawyer tried to comfort me and shared something that brought me a sense of peace. He said Dad was incredibly proud of me for pursuing my passion despite his pressure and was impressed that I was willing to sacrifice generational wealth for what I truly loved. The lawyer also informed me that I was now the decision maker for the business and that I had the option to take it back from the trust and run it myself. After hearing this, I began to reflect. I had spent my life pursuing my dreams, and Dad had supported me indirectly all along. Now, it felt like the right time to honor his legacy and take the company to the heights he had always envisioned. When I returned home, I shared the news with my children about their grandpa's will. They were delighted to learn that their grandfather had left a portion of his wealth for them to inherit once they turned 18. Later that day, we visited his grave with flowers and spent time in serene remembrance. This is an incredibly emotional phase of my life. As expected, the aunts came running back the moment they saw the sugar candy. Just a month after Dad's passing, I started taking over his business and community service work. The first thing I did was quit my job to fully dedicate myself to managing the business. I also decided to rent out my old house, as my children and I had already settled into my parents' house. It felt right to stay here, a place filled with cherished memories of my parents and now a symbol of continuity for our family. This house is deeply connected to my children and me. For them, it's their grandpa's home, filled with his warmth and memories. For me, it's the place of my childhood where every corner holds a special moment. I have no intention of leaving it. With the news of my inheritance spreading, visitors began arriving at my door, long-lost relatives, distant friends, and curious neighbors. But the most shocking visitors were my ex-wife, Ale, and her parents. They walked into the house, sobbing, claiming they had no idea about my father's passing and would have attended the funeral if they had known. Her parents began praising my dad, saying all sorts of kind things about him. Ale hugged the children and started crying, talking about how much she missed them. I wasn't moved by her display. I asked her plainly, if you miss the kids so much, why didn't you visit them in the past 7 to 8 months? She weakly replied that she had gone to our old house, but it was locked. I wasn't buying it. Weren't you worried when you saw the house locked? Didn't you think to call me and check if the kids were okay? I asked. She had no answer. Her parents tried to shift the conversation, suggesting we forget the past and reconcile. They argued that now, with my father gone, the children would be left alone in the house when I went to work, and they needed their mother. I laughed in their faces. The children needed her most when she abandoned them. Now, they've adapted to her absence, and I certainly didn't want her back in my life. Ale started crying as her parents left the room. She grabbed my hands and pleaded, saying she loved me and missed the children. I couldn't help but laugh. You don't love me, I told her. You love the wealth my dad left me. You and your greedy parents are here to leech off my money. I didn't regret those words one bit because they were the truth. Ale had even called my father greedy and mean during our divorce. There was no way I was letting her or her parents touch a single penny of my dad's hard-earned money. She became offended and lashed out, saying she had been pleading out of love, but now she would take what was rightfully hers. She claimed she hadn't demanded alimony during the divorce, but now wanted half of my wealth. No, half of my dad's wealth. I stayed calm and told her, do whatever you want. You won't get a penny from me. She stormed out after hurling insults. Later, I discussed this with my lawyer. He assured me that her chances of getting anything were slim. The divorce was finalized over a year before my inheritance, and the children were with me. However, he cautioned me to be careful about letting her spend time with the kids. She could manipulate them to file for custody and later use them as leverage for financial demands. I'm incredibly grateful for his advice. Since then, I've made sure to supervise any interaction she has with the children. I'm also spending more time with them myself, helping them cope with the loss of their grandfather. This way, they won't feel the need to turn to their mother for emotional support. Taking over my dad's company has been a blessing. It allows me the flexibility to balance my personal life and my responsibilities. I'm planning a vacation with the kids to the Bahamas. They deserve it. This isn't about splurging my dad's wealth. I could have afforded it before, but back then, I was too tied up with work and caring for Dad. Now that I have the time, I want to give them this experience. As for Ale, she hasn't contacted me since her dramatic visit. I suspect she's busy running to every lawyer's office, trying to file a suit against me.